Good afternoon. On behalf of the Markup UK Organization Committee, I would like to welcome you to our next webinar. We are offering these webinars as an alternative to the live conference that could not happen this year. My name is Geert Bormans, and I'm your host for this evening. Today will be the last webinar on XProc 3 before we will have a final Q&A session next week. We would like to encourage each one of you to send in your questions for Achim and Erik beforehand, to allow them to prepare the answers and maybe add some code examples. You can do so by sending an email to info@markupuk.org. The audience has spoken on the XQuery webinar that Adam Retter will kindly provide later this week. The topic will be XQuery is the plumber's toolkit. We strongly believe that this would also be interesting for those that don't consider themselves a hardcore XQuery developer. If you haven't registered yet, please do so at markupuk.org. So, before we go into today's webinar, you can ask your questions for Achim in the Q&A of the Zoom interface. My co-hosts, Andrew and Ari, will organize them as we go, and Achim will pick the questions up at the end of the webinar. We will be recording this webinar, and you will be able to find the recording on the Markup UK YouTube channel no later than this evening. For now, I would like to give a warm welcome to Achim Berndzen. Achim is the editor of the XProc specification, or one of the editors of the XProc specification, and he is the developer behind the Morgana XProc 3 processor. Achim will talk about text processing and XProc 3 today. Take it away, Achim.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Gert. Welcome to part 5 of the XProc 3.0 series at Markup UK 2020. After having dealt with JSON and zip documents in XProc, today's topic is about text documents in XProc 3.0. I will show you what you can do with text documents in XProc 3.0 and how to do this. Normally, the first thing to do would be to give some motivation why to think about text documents. I think this is not necessary for text because we all agree that this is a useful feature. We all deal a lot with text documents every day, and at one point or the other, you might want probably to incorporate them in your XProc pipelines. Before we start, let's get a clear concept of what XProc means by text document. The specs has a definition of a text document, and this definition is fairly easy. It says, every document with content type text asterisk is a text document. Of course, except text XML, which becomes an XML document, and of course, except text HTML, which becomes an HTML document. So what an XProc processor is supposed to do is to look at the content type of the document coming in, and if it's text XML, it will call the XML parser. If it's text HTML, it will call the HTML parser. And if it's text something else, then it will create a plain text document. There are other content types called out in the specs because XProc is dealing with them. Of course, application, relax, ng, compact syntax. There's only one similar slide, so this is easy to do, is a text document. You can now load them relatively easy with the validate with relax ng step. It was a bit complicated in XProc 1.0. And then the same is true for application XQuery. Application XQuery is a text document containing an XQuery query. And it's now fairly easy to use them. Actually, you could think about synthesizing your XQuery in an XProc pipeline and then run it to the processor because it's treated as text. And then the specification has a last type, which is explicitly called out. Its application JavaScript is also defined as a text content type. Currently, we have no standard step to deal with JavaScript, but as you can run JavaScript on the virtual machine, and Morgana XProc and XML Calabash both run on the virtual machine, there might be some step just running JavaScript in XProc. And additionally, there are implementation defined content types. So if apart from this list, someone comes up and says, look, we have this content type and I think we should treat it as text, but it does not start with text, it's fairly easy to extend this on a implementation level. So if you take this into account, you get a pretty filled basket of documents we are talking about here. The most important types for me in my work are certainly those ones. So it's a lot of plain text, ASCII text, or UTF-8 text as I'm on macOS. Then I do a lot with Markdown documents because all my nodes are written in Markdown, and this is so I can incorporate them in my pipeline. Then we all deal, or most of us will deal a lot with CSV documents where you have a table which is line and column separated to encode the cells. We have XQuery here over here, and of course there may be some other document type which is or some text document type which is important to you. Let's see how text documents are represented in XProc. If you think a moment about the XDM universe, there are two alternatives, and I think we should have a clear concept of what a document is. You may have, if you attended my JSON slide, you may remember this slide. What is a document in XProc? As a reminder, a document is always a pair of a representation and properties. And the properties are metadata flowing with the representation through your pipeline. We called out, I think, 3. If I miss one, you have to look it up in Eric's book. We call 3 metadata or properties which are always there. It's the base URI of the document. If the document has one, there may be documents that do not have a base URI. Then content type, and you may add a serialization property where you set out the special serialization settings for this document. And if the document gets serialized by the processor, either to the command line, to the console, or to pstore, or to phttp request, those deserialization map is used to control the serialization process. What is important for us here is, again, a special property, and this property is content type. This property does 2 things. It first tells us what content type actually the document is. And secondly, it tells us on the other side what to expect as a representation, or what the representation is. This is important because every XProc document can be the context item of an XProc, of an XPath expression. And if you have the XPath dot expression, the content type determines what you get as content item for this. Of course, if the content type is application XML, what you get is an XML document as representation. So actually you get a document node, and this document node has child nodes, which can be text nodes or element nodes, and so on. And the element nodes can have childs too, and they can have attributes, and so on. You know the story. So whenever you have content type XML, it makes sense to write an XPath expression which asks for elements or something like this with this document in as a context item. Okay, what about text documents? Text documents are for instance, text plain. They can be any other type of text, but they, for instance, text plain, and they are represented as a document node having just one child, and this child is a single text node. The other decision one could have made when dealing with text documents was to say that the representation is just a string. But we decided to take a document node and a text node. So whenever the content type is text, whatever, you know the context item for an XParse expression using this document will be a document node and a text node. So it makes sense to ask for text, but it does not make sense to ask for any elements in this document because this document will not have elements or processing instructions or comments. One important thing to keep in mind when we talk about text documents is that the mapping between content type and a representation for text documents is only true if you read it from left to right, from right to left, I'm sorry, from the content type to the representation. The opposite is not true. It's not true that whenever you encounter a document which has just one document node with a single text node, you can infer that its content type is text plain. I will show you later why this is, but in some cases, the content type may also be application XML. We see later why this is. Okay, this for the basics. Now let's get to the basic use patterns for text. The first one is obviously creating a text document inline. This is the way to do this. We have a P with input, and then we have a P inline with a content type saying this is a text document, and then we have the text document between the angle brackets. Here we have a text document which goes over, which is a bit longer. One special thing to have in mind when working with text documents is that everything between this angle bracket and this angle bracket is part of the text document. So you should be careful with indents, because if you put a new line before this word here, it will be part of the document, and if you put a new line here, it will also be part of the document. If you want this, this is fine, but typically you should care for the indents here. The other thing you can do with text documents when you have is to remember when you work with text documents is to remember that everything between this P inline and this P inline is a potential text value template. That means you can use curly braces inside the text to invoke text value templates. Text documents start and end with text value. The curly brackets here start and end the text value templates. Normally, this is what you want. If you want to have a text that contains curly brackets, literally curly brackets, you have two options. Either you write two curly brackets open, two curly brackets closed, so you double them to escape them, or you use the expand text false attribute on this P inline or anything, anywhere up the tree where you like to disable text value template. Let me show you how this looks when we use text value templates. Here we have a text document, and inside is a text value template, which is just a call to the current XParse current date function. Technically, everything between this curly bracket and this curly bracket is taken as a text, which is interpreted as an XParse expression. It's evaluated, and the value is inserted, or I should say the result is inserted in this text. In this case, it's a XS datetime, which is serialized to a text. So this would be today is the day, current day, and here we have the same with the current time. Okay, these are the basic use patterns. There are some errors I run over in when I write text documents, and I think you might like to know what not to do when creating text documents. Okay, just a moment. Sorry. Here we have an XPath function. XProc always also defines variables and options, and XProc also defines its own functions like document properties. Whatever is visible at this place can be used here. So you can use any variable which is visible and to put it into your text. So you have a nice little macro processing feature here to compose text documents. Okay, let's look at some common errors. Creating a text document, there's a red not because what is in this box will not create a proper text document. This is the first one. I have a plain text document and it says XML works with angle bracket open, angle bracket closed. The processor will fail on this, and I think you all see the problem. The curly brackets, the angle brackets are the problem. What we have here is an XML document. So if we want the curly brackets to be literal, we have to escape them and write LT and GT. I sometimes forget this. For example, if I take a text snippet out of another document and I copy it into the XML document, in the XProc pipeline, and I try to compile, and of course the compilation fails, it doesn't even parse. Another problem comes from the shortcuts XProc provided. When you work with XML documents, you can leave out the p inline and just write your text in your document in the p with input. With text document, you can't do this. If you write something like this, p inline, this is a text document, this will compile and you actually get a text document out of it, but it's not a text document. It's an XML document because the content type here is missing and the content type attribute here is not optional. If you leave out the content type attribute on p inline, or you leave out the p inline completely, the processor will treat this as an XML document. And so what you get here is an XML document, one document node with a text node, so same representation as a text node. But if you ask for the content type of the document, it will be application XML, and it will be serialized as application XML. And as this is not a proper XML document, it probably won't serialize. Okay, the content type attribute is not optional here. These are typical errors I made less now, but in when I started to work with XProc and 3 and test what you can do. Loading a text document is fairly easy. You just write pload and then a href to the URI with a text document. If you do this, you trust your processor that it's able to interfere to make out that this document is a text document. Typically, if it's file, the processor will try to look for the suffix and take the suffix as a base. If you are not sure that the processor will do the right thing, or if you want to be sure that all processors do the right thing, you can do this. You just write pload and then you give the context type explicitly. So the processor knows that this is a text document and that you want to create a document which has this content type property. And of course, you can bind the text document directly to a port without the loading. If you just need the document once on a specific step, this is the way to do. If you need the document more and want to pipe to this step, then you take a pload, because the document then is only one, you make sure that the document is only once loaded, and all the other reference to this are links to the in-memory document. Of course, you can always also load documents from HTTP request. Here's a more complex one. I have the URI to the href with the URI to the text resource, and then there's this parameter map on HTTP request, which allows you to say override content type, which means whatever the processor sends back as in the content type header is thrown away and text plain. Here with the ISO encoding, charset encoding is taken. So this is a good way to deal with wrongly configured processors, or processors that wrongly configured websites, or websites that return not reliable content type headers for your result. The last way to do text loading is using the XParse functions. There are two nice XParse functions here. The first one, unparsed text, and unparsed text will load this text document and put it into this and create a text document. So you see, I use the TVTs here. So the XParse expression inside this is evaluated and returned. Of course, you can also use unparsed text lines, which will read the text and split it in lines, but you have to be careful because this does not return a single atomic value, but a sequence of atomic values, and these have to be treated a bit different. Let's go back to one slide. With XParse functions, you have to be careful where you put it. You see here, I put the XParse function in a p-inline. In the p-inline, you might be tempted to do this. You don't write it in the inline, but you see that, okay, there's a p-input, and the p-input has a select expression, and there I can say, give an XParse expression too. This works. So what will happen here is the unparsed text function will be evaluated with the p-empty, so the empty context item, which is fine because p-unparsed text doesn't relate to the context, but you won't get a text document, but a JSON document. The general rule is whenever select on p with input returns an atomic value, a JSON document is created. So this might be a bit strange because you might expect that when you have an XParse expression returning an XS string, you get a text document, but you won't. You get a JSON document which has this string value. The general rule, I think, makes sense because this could also be return a number or a Boolean value or something like this, and you surely don't want your numbers to be turned in text. You want to want them as JSON numbers you can add some things to, and so on. So this is the thing to remember, that if you put select, you always get a JSON document and not a text document. The last standard use pattern I would like to show you is a test within the pipeline. How do you test that a document or whether a document that flows in on a step is a text document? This is useful, for example, if you unpack a zip and there flow a lot of documents out of this zip, and you need to treat the different documents in the different document types in different ways. The easiest way to do this is just write an if and then use the built-in XParse function P document properties with the flowing in document as context item, and you ask for content type. And if it's text plain, or if it's something like text, then wrap a sequence around it, make it an XML document. Otherwise, do nothing and just return the document that turns out that appears on the source port of this PF. This is a standard way to work with text documents to get rid of them once and all, because you can load the text documents and then you can say wrap sequence with the wrapper, and that will produce a document node with an element node named text, and the original text is now a child of this text node. So now you got a proper XML document from the text document. In some situations, this makes sense when you just want them to flow between the pipeline, or you may think that the wrapper is a P, and you produce a P, and the text now becomes text of this HTML P document, and you put it in an XML document. So you might think of this when you're synthesizing documents from different sources, each becomes a paragraph, and the result should be a nice XML document. The second way to test for text documents is this expression, which uses the specifica of a text document. It says count the number of nodes, and if the number of nodes is 1 and the only child node this document node has is instant of text, then treat it as text. This is useful because the function P document property is only visible in contexts, in XPath contexts evaluated by the XProc processor. All the steps have their own XPath context, and the function is not visible there. So if you want to do this in a step, setting the some parameter for a step or some option for a step, you can use this. But remember what we said before, this is not a definite test for a text document, because having only one child node, a document node with just one child node, and this node is a text node, might also be true for XML documents. You remember the mapping goes from the content type to the representation, not in this case from the representation to the content type. And then we have some steps defined for XProc documents in the standards step library, the library that comes with every conformant processor. We have text count, which just counts the line in the text document, which might be handy sometimes. Then we have ptext, text head, which gives you the n first lines of a text document, where n is a parameter. ptail gives you the last n lines. Text join is nice because it takes takes a sequence of text documents on its source port and joins them together to one text document on the output port. And you can give a header which goes before the first joined text. You can give a separated string which goes between the text which are joined, and you can give a footer which will end the text. Then we have text replace, which is a nice wrapper around the XPath function replace, where you give a regex expression and a replace expression. And what XProc will do is, with the text document on the source port of text replace, it will evaluate this regex expression, and every matched region will be replaced by the text. And then we have text sort, which, as you might expect, will sort the text. It will actually sort the text lines. This is surely not a useful step for all sorts of text. You don't want lyrics or poetry to be sorted by lines. But if you think of CSV, it might make sense to sort them in lines and to get some order. These are the built-in steps, and then we have a text step library, which has just one step currently, the only one we came up so far. It's markdown to HTML. What it does, it takes a text document in the markdown flavor on its source port, and it will produce HTML on its output port. If you want more text-related steps, tell us. As I said, the text step library just has one step, and we split up the specification into a core library and then a lot of topic-related libraries, so we can change one library without changing all the other stuff. And that's, I think this will make it easy to adapt the XProc step libraries to user needs. Okay, so much for the slides. Let's go to the live coding now. I will switch to Oxygen, and I will highlight this. Here's a typical example of just a small pipeline. Sorry, I think the screen sharing switched. I get a sign. No, obviously not. Could someone of the editors please step in and help me? I get a sign your screen sharing was stopped.
It is not stopped, Achim. Sorry.
Okay, if I switch to Oxygen, I get a warning on my screen. Your screen sharing was interrupted, but this is not true. So you can see my Oxygen now.
No, we see your slides, but not the slides, but.
Okay, so obviously I did something wrong. And I have to start this. I start this again, and now I go to Oxygen. Where is Oxygen? Oxygen is there. Can you see it now? Okay, yes. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No problem.
Okay. Last time we didn't have this problem when we switched. Okay, sorry. So I have just a simple pipeline which loads the text document from this URI, and let's start to run and see what happens. You see it loads a text document. It actually is a rather long text document because it has about 4,800 lines. And if we go to the top, I try to slide it, we can see it's the Project Gutenberg's edition of Romeo and Julia by William Shakespeare. Actually, they say it's an ebook, and yes, but it's a strange kind of ebook. But because the document I downloaded is just formatted ASCII text, as you can see, if I scroll down, we have the year, we have the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, and start with the Dramatis Personae. And if I scroll down, we come to the prologue and the first act and so on. First thing I would like to show you is how you can make use of the built-in XParse text function in XProc to deal with text documents, apart from the steps we had before. As you might see, we have a lot of white space here. There are a lot of free white lines. And what I would like to do now is to load this step and get rid of the white lines. And there's an easy way to do it. It's a bit brutal way to do it, but it works. I load the step document, and then I use the tokenize function in XParse on this for ease to tokenize the text into single elements using this regular expression. And then I say I just want the ones to return which are not, after calling normalized space, are blank. So what this does is it splits it into line and returns only those lines who are not completely blank. I create a new text document for each line by taking the default readable port with a TVT, and then I join them together, all the lines together, to one text document, and between the lines I put in the line separator again. So let's see whether this works. And you see the text looks much better. The number of lines is now down to 3,600. So there were more than 1,200 empty text lines. Not too impressive, but something you need. And I think it's important to keep in mind that all the text or string related XPath functions can be used in XProc to solve your special problems in the way I just showed you. Okay, now I would like to do something more sophisticated in the last example. What I want to do is I want to have a run a statistics over this text, and I want to do a statistics by appearance. As you see, every appearance of a character or every turn a character takes is encoded here in the same way. It's an abbreviation for the name followed by a dot, and then comes his turn, and then comes the next. So I want to count, for example, for this character and how often it comes, how often he or she takes turns on speaking. So I came up with this user-written step, which is called demo text parse, and what it does is it runs some statistics over the play. By the way, it's a generic tool because the all other Shakespeare dramas in the project Gutenberg are encoded in the same way. So I could use this step not just to go over Romeo and Juliet, but I could, for instance, go over Hamlet or the other Shakespeare plays to make some statistics. I want to count the appearance of every character, which is introduced by its abbreviation. I wrote a user-written step, which is called demo text statistics, and it takes a header which will appear above the list, and then have a JSON array, an array, and the array is filled with maps, and the maps is just a pair saying the name is Romeo. This is what we want in our statistics, but what we search for is rom punct. The same for Juliet, which is Jul dot, and Tubal, and of course Mercutio. Let's run this and see what it does, and then I show you how it works. So here's the statistics. You see that the text synopsis of Romeo and Juliet is written before the text, and then we have Romeo, which has 163 turns, and Juliet 117 turns, and Tubal only 17, and Mercutio has 62. So let's look how this works. You might ask where the user-written step is in this pipeline. The answer is here. With a p-import step, you can either import another step or a library of steps. So you can write your reusable step libraries and then just import them into one pipeline. And I show you how it works. Here, let me go to the top. Here's my statistics step. And what it just does is, it's explained here. It goes over the port source, and then searches for the first entry in the array parts. And if there are more, then it returns recursively the other ones. By the way, what I use here is a nice XProc documentation feature. There's this P documentation element on XProc, which can appear anywhere you like. And as you see, I use the XHTML namespace here to enter purely HTML for documentation. So you can nicely document your steps. And what you also can do is to make a synopsis or a reference of your library. If you think you run an XSLT over this library and you extract just the type and the description, you can have a short manual which refers to your description. If you go to the Transpect.io website of the Transpect toolbox, you can see a lot of descriptions of steps generated in this way. Okay, what the key worker behind the text part statistics, of course, is here the text part counts. What it does, it takes one of the pairs Romeo, Rom, and applies it to the text. So let's see what text part counts does. It just runs the step text word count with these for the short version, and then it generates a text document which has the longer version, the original version, Romeo, and the number returned by this word count, and this is returned. So the next one is to go to word count, and what word count does is it just counts the number of times how often a pattern, a certain regex pattern comes in. And because a word is a regex pattern which starts with white space and ends with white space, it just runs a text count. How often is this pattern appearing in the text? And then we go down to demo text count, and demo text count calls the analyze string to actually parse the string and see how often this is in. And the p filter here just takes out the matched elements and counts them. And the last inner line is just a nice wrapper around the analyze string, the XPath function analyze string, which uses the source document and searches for pattern. What you can see here is how you can develop in step libraries in XProc, which are easy to be reused, because this analyze string could be called in any pipeline. But if you want this and would search for any string, but if you want to search for words, if you want to know how often something is in, you could call this. And if you want to know how often the word is in, you would call for this. I put the slides of this presentation and the steps and the demos on my GitHub repo, so you can check out and play with them. I'll show you the link in a moment, but I have to switch screen again, I guess, for this. Yep. Before we do this, over to you, Gert. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Achim. More cool stuff for us to play with. I have a feeling we are now really equipped to start doing real work with XProc. Thank you also for showing us this how to componentize and make libraries and do our own step development. It feels like it brings XProc development to a different level. There is a question from, let me check, sorry. Edward Porter. Edward, I'm going to allow you to talk so you can ask your question yourself.
Hey, sure, thanks.
Hi.
So quick question about the markdown to HTML function that you discussed. I assume that's probably implementation specific.
Sorry,
Like
could you repeat the question?
yeah, so the markdown to HTML function you mentioned, would that be implementation specific?
There in the specs, it says it. Let me. I'm not sure I can share the specs with you again at the moment, because every time I switch the screen, it says I lost the connection. If you look up the specs, there is a description what it should do if it's implemented. So the behavior of the step is not implementation defined.
Okay, that was what I was wondering.
But whether the step is shipped with a processor or not, that is implementation defined. So we have the core step library, which every processor has to ship, and then we have the other steps which the processor might ship. If he ships it, he has to apply to the rules or adhere to the rules in the specifications. I think what we say there is that it's not every markdown, but I think it's common mark that we accept, because there's a standard definition to take a common mark to HTML, and we rest on this.
Follow-up question. Do you think it would be possible to control the classes for those HTML elements that are generated from the markdown, or would it maybe be best to just do that in a follow-up step where you manipulate the HTML as like XML?
Yeah, this would be the better way, because if I remember, actually, I'm not an expert on this. You should ask Norm. I think if you look at the XML Calabash specifications, he already had something like this for XProc 1.0. I think what we say there is we take this common mark to HTML, so it's defined by the XSLT template what we will do, and you have no control what happens there.
Okay.
If you want to have control, this would be a case of invisible XML, because give your own syntax with the markdown, and you get whatever you want. But currently, invisible XML is not a step which is on the agenda. I played around a bit around with it in my processor, but it's not publicly visible.
Okay, thank you, Achim. There's also a question from Sid. Let me allow Sid to talk. Can you ask your question, Sid?
Or you can just ask it for me.
Hi, Sid.
You can.
Hello.
Hi, Sid.
Thank you. This is quite cool. I had the same question about Markdown, but also I'm wondering, when we're worried about curly, when using p input with a text document, the text node there allows for text value templates using curly braces, so we have to escape curly braces. Can you escape the curly brace with just with a numeric character reference? £$ X7B, or do you have to?
Let me think. The spec says you have to use curly braces, but I think the parser is expected to take the numeric value and return curly braces. So whatever my processor will just see curly braces. Actually, no idea. I have to test it.
Okay. I'm glad to have stumped you. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. What is the reason not using the curly braces directly?
None. It's just I'm more used to using the NCRs. I think doubling a curly brace is just fine. I have no problem with it. Just
okay. I see. Yes.
Anyway, thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I have something, well, I had a question myself, Achim, if you allow me.
Of course.
On the same topic, escaping text in DP input. Is this required to be a single text node? I saw you escaping the brackets with numeric entities. I was wondering, can I have different C data sections and have the text value templates in between them?
In C data sections?
No, in between. So I have two C data sections where I don't have to do all this escaping. And if I want to move over to a text value template, put it in between two C data sections. But I guess we would end up with more text nodes then.
Yeah.
But that's allowed.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So,
I hope it is allowed. If not, test it out, and if it's not allowed, blame me on the Q&A session. In the Q&A session,
yes.
I would say it's allowed because for a text document, whatever comes out of the XParse expression is part of the text document. Yeah, I would say it's allowed.
Okay, I will test it, and if not, you will see the email come in.
Yes, please.
Oh, seems like there is.
I'll make the correction on the Q&A session.
Oh, there's another question from Sid. To where would we send suggestions for library steps?
I would say file an issue on GitHub. On a GitHub repro. It's easy to get to the GitHub repro. Let me see what, can I step out here and open my browser?
Yeah, try.
But you can't see my browser, can you?
Yeah.
Gert, could you tell me when you are able to see my browser?
Yeah. Not yet.
It's, but now.
We do.
Okay. So for the step repro, it's just XProc, and then username is XProc, and then it's in the XProc in the 3.0 steps repro. But if you file it to any other repro, we will sort it out. If you just make up an issue and write what is your idea of the text, the more specific, the better, of course. But if it's just an idea, we can deal with this as perfect too.
Okay. Sid just writes, excellent, thanks.
Yeah, I have a list now.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Achim. So there are no further questions. Before we end this webinar, a few reminders. Achim brought it up himself. Don't forget to send in questions for the XProc Q&A next week. And this week we have in total 3 webinars, so there's 2 more to come. On Wednesday, there's Liam Quinn talking about XSLT3. And on Thursday, there is XQuery is the plumber's toolkit. It's someone wants to compete with XProc. Adam Retter will do this talk. Don't forget to register if you haven't yet done so. For now, I would like to thank Achim for his excellent presentation again. And we also would want to thank all of you for attending and for your continuous support. Have a nice evening and see you on Wednesday.
Bye.